We're fresh off Johnny Walker getting one of the biggest upsets of 2025, and these are the fights to make after UFC Shanghai. I've got the prelims and the main card fights, winners from the prelims, winners and losers from the main card on screen with the timestamps. And we'll start off with the first prelim winner, Satibuliev, getting the submission win over Diar Nurgazai. 1-1 in the UFC. Good submission win as well, especially in the light heavyweight division where there isn't many grapplers. So when we do have a good grappler like Satibuliev, he might be able to go far. But I'm going to match him up against Ibo Aslan. I think Ibo Aslan might be booked against like Junior Tafra or some shit, but knowing the Tafra brothers, they're probably going to pull out. So I think this fight kind of makes sense. Satibuliev versus Ibo Aslan. He just pulled off the submission over Diar Nurgazai, which again, for an equal choke in the light heavyweight division is quite impressive. And I'm actually kind of intrigued to see how far Satibuliev can go. And considering that, like I said, he's 1-1 in the UFC. Ibo Aslan was once one of the better prospects when he knocked out Rafael Sequeira in like 30 seconds, but he's lost his last 2 fights. He looked awful in both of them. He's lost all of his hype. He needs to step down in competition. So I think this fight might kind of make sense. Striker versus grappler. Really good grappler in Satibuliev versus very, well, I want to say a heavy-handed dude in Ibo Aslan, but we've given him cans and he's not been able to crush them. So I'm still not entirely intrigued how good Ibo Aslan is. But I'd book this fight. It's a step up for Satibuliev, a guy that hits pretty hard. Better opposition than Diar Nurgazai, who's not UFC worthy. And for Ibo Aslan, he's facing a grappler. He's facing somebody, like I said, who's 1-1 in the UFC. He's not facing another, I guess, dangerous-ish striker like Billy Elliott, even though he's mainly a grappler. So, Aslan, Satibuliev, get it done at some point. Striker versus grappler. 2 low-level light heavyweights on the roster. Loser gets cut from the UFC. Winner gets to step up. And I'm assuming that Satibuliev would win this fight. So, you know, it's going to be good for Satibuliev. Then we've got Su Young-Yu. Gets the job done over Long Zhao. Personally, I thought Long Zhao got the job done, but he gets the win. Is Su Young-Yu. I think he's 4-0 in the UFC now. 3-0 or 4-0 in the UFC, and he's like 2-0 on road to the UFC as well. So even though you can call it a robbery and whatever, the guy's winning on a frequent basis. So for Su Young-Yu, I'd give him a step up in competition. I'd give him Damon Blackshear. I think this is like the perfect opponent for Su Young-Yu. We're not giving him somebody too highly, you know, too good of an opponent. Not anyone close to the top 15, but we're not just giving him another can to crush. I think this is a fair step up in competition. He just beat Su Young-Yu. He just beat Long Zhao. Looked good in the first 2 rounds. Again, I don't think it was an absolute robbery, but I thought Long Zhao should have got the job done. And considering that, like I said, he is now 3-0 in the UFC. He does need a bit of a step up in competition. Damon Blackshear started off on a bit of a rise coming into 2025. Lost to Davy Grant a couple of weeks back, so he's now coming off a loss. So I think this fight makes sense. It's a step down for Damon Blackshear. He's not facing these guys who are like borderline top 15. And for Su Young-Yu, he's getting a step up. And if he does beat Damon Blackshear, then maybe we can talk about someone in the top 15 for Su Young-Yu, because like I said, he'll be 4-0 in the UFC at that point. And I think stylistically, it could be an interesting matchup too. They both have quite a similar style. Obviously, Damon Blackshear being like a BJJ heavy grappler. Su Young-Yu usually implements the grappling. They can both kind of strike on the feet, and neither of them are great though. So I think it's a fairly even matchup. It's a step up for Su Young-Yu, close to the top 15. It's a step down for Damon Blackshear, but not like a monumental step down where we're just giving him another can to crush. So Su Young-Yu, Damon Blackshear, I'd get that fight done at some point later on this year. And then for Yiza, one of the few Chinese fighters to actually get a KO on this card, as he knocks out Weston Wilson in what was about 20 seconds. Just walks in, had no time to waste, blasted him and knocked him out in, like I said, about 20 seconds. He's going to need a bit of a step up in competition, in my opinion, now, is Yiza. So I would do Yiza. I'd put him against Christian Rodriguez. I think this is a fair matchup for Yiza at this moment in time. Christian Rodriguez, he was one of the better fighters coming into 2025. He was kind of labelled as the prospect killer, but now he's on a 2-fight losing streak. Lost to Andre Fili and lost to Melquizel Costa, so he's going to need a step down in competition. So I'd do Yiza versus C-Rod. If Yiza can beat C-Rod, even though C-Rod's coming off a few losses, that's still an impressive win, because C-Rod's kind of viewed as like the prospect killer in this division, in the featherweight division. So if Yiza can get past him, then it kind of shows that he's a little bit legit. And for C-Rod, if he can crush another prospect in Yiza, that's going to be good for C-Rod. Back in the winning column, I think it could be quite a competitive fight. Both guys, decent stand-up, decent grappling. It's a step up for Yiza as well. We're not just giving him another can. So Yiza, C-Rod, I get that done. Then Kyle Dorcas was one of the best finishers on the card, as he goes out there and knocks out Michel Pereira as a massive underdog. Now for Kyle Dorcas, I don't want to rush him too fast to the top 15. I don't want to give him another top 15 guy ASAP, because he has fought top 15 guys like Roman Dolidze and Brendan Allen before, and he's been finished before. So I don't want to rush him. Let's let him get his toes wet in the UFC. I'd do Kyle Dorcas against Andre Muniz. I think this is a fair matchup for Kyle Dorcas. It's a very winnable matchup. Andre Muniz has really good grappling, so does Kyle Dorcas, and I think he's probably, after that performance, a better striker than Muniz. So I think this is just giving Kyle Dorcas the experience he needs in the UFC. Like I said, we're not rushing him. We're not getting him in the top 15 as soon as possible, because like I said, he's lost to top 15 guys before, and he's only just beat Michel Pereira, who just arguably lost, well, who just lost to number 15 ranked Abbas Magomedov. So I'd do Kyle Daukaus versus Andre Muniz. Muniz just got knocked out by Ikram Aliskerov. He's going to want a bit of a step down in competition. And I would usually call Kyle Daukaus a can, but after knocking out Michel Pereira, maybe he's not. So for Kyle Daukaus, I'd do him and Muniz. Maybe even get this on the Brazil card. If Kyle Daukaus is trying to be active, there's a Brazil card in October. Muniz should be ready by then. Maybe you do Muniz versus Kyle Daukaus then. But it is a step up for Kyle Daukaus, a new kind of style, a new grappler, but very winnable for Kyle Daukaus. And if he can beat Andre Muniz, at that point, I'm willing to give him someone in the top 15. So Daukaus, Muniz, get that fight done. Then for Rong Zhu, Rong Zhu has to be one of my favourite Asian fighters on the roster because he just does the same shit every time. I know a lot of these Asian fighters kind of try copy Korean Zombie with their very scrappy style, but Rong Zhu makes it fun every time. The guy don't give a fuck. He just comes to scrap. I'd do Rong Zhu. I'd do him against I can't even pronounce the first name. I'm doing it against Borshev. Rong Zhu versus Borshev. I think this would be an absolute fire matchup at 155. Rong Zhu, this hard-hitting guy who comes to scrap, hits very hard on the feet, and like I said, just comes to scrap. And Borshev's a very similar guy. Might not be the best fighter in the world, might not be the most consistent fighter, but hits very hard on the feet and generally kind of comes to scrap. They're both in a similar career. Well, no, not in a similar career spot, but it makes sense in the sense that Rong Zhu's on a 2-fight winning streak. Borshev has been losing the vast majority of his recent fights, needs a bit of a step down. I think it's the perfect fight. It's a step up for Rong Zhu against an experienced guy in Borshev, who, like I said, hits pretty hard and is still kind of dangerous. And stylistically, this isn't that bad of a matchup for Borshev. I know Rong Zhu has grappling, but he's not having to face another heavy grappler as Borshev. It's just a pure striking matchup against a guy who's, you know, fairly green in his UFC career. So Rong Zhu, Borshev, I reckon this will be an absolute scrap if you put it on. It's either going to be a fight of the night or it's going to be some sort of knockout. I think if it was to go fight of the night, it'd probably be in favour of Rong Zhu. If someone's getting the KO, it's probably going to be Borshev. But I like the matchup. It makes sense. Rong Zhu, Borshev, get that fight done. And then for Charles Johnson, with one of the biggest underdog performances on the card, knocks out Lonnie Kavanagh in the second round, shutting down one of the biggest flyweight prospects right now. And to be fair to Charles Johnson, the guy's won 5 of his last 6 fights. 5 of his last 6 fights he's won, and that only loss was a close fight too. This guy needs to step up in competition. I don't think we need to give him someone in the top 15. I think we need to give him someone in the top 10. I think it's time we give Charles Johnson the respect. Knocking out Lonnie Kavanagh, and like I said, he's knocked out Joshua Van before. Let's give him someone in the top 10. There's a lot of matchups I like in the top 10. I think for Charles Johnson, the one that kind of makes sense for me is somebody like Alex Perez. Alex Perez is in the top 10. Like I said, he's a level above Charles Johnson right now, but he isn't in the best career spot. He's inactive. He's barely fighting. He's losing the vast majority of his recent fights. He got a good KO against Nicolau early last year, but he got injured against Tyron. He's nowhere to be seen. This makes ultimate sense for me for Charles Johnson. It's a step up in competition against a tough guy in the top 10 as well. If he beats Alex Perez, which at this moment in time, I'd probably favour him to beat Perez. Like I said, Perez is aging. He's inactive. He's barely winning these days. Johnson's looking sick. So if Johnson can beat Perez, he's in the top 10. And then you've got a bit of a storyline for Johnson because he's obviously knocked out Joshua Van before. And he's going to be one of the better up-and-coming guys we've got at 125. And for Alex Perez, he's coming back against a guy who's obviously a much lower level guy, who was booked against Steve Erceg. This guy, statistically, in Charles Johnson, is lower level than Steve Erceg. And if he beats Charles Johnson, like I said, he's back in the winning column. He's shut down a guy who's coming off a good win. And that's going to be big for Perez too. So I think either way, Johnson versus Perez makes sense. I hope they don't do Johnson against some guy who's like unranked or some like really up and like another big prospect or someone who's barely top 15. I think we'll roll Charles Johnson. The guy's active. The guy's winning consistently. He's getting good wins too. Give him someone in the top 10. Perez is coming off a loss. Get the fight done. Gets Charles Johnson in the top 10. Johnson versus Perez. Get the fight done. That already screams like Apex card featured fight. So get it done. And then for Gage Young, I'm not too bothered about Gage Young. I'm still not sure if he's UFC worthy. Give him like Kurt Holloway. Give him a can to crush. Gage Young, low-level guy at 155. Kurt Holloway, low-level guy at 155. Gage Young versus Holloway. Step down for Holloway. Step up for Young. Makes sense. And then for the main card, Kiefer Crosby takes his 3rd consecutive finish loss in the UFC as he loses to Naraji. For Kiefer Crosby, I'd probably just cut him from the UFC. At this point, why is he still in the UFC? I'm surprised he still got this fight booked with Naraji, to be fair. The guy's 0-3 in the UFC. All 3 of those losses are by finish. He got beaten by Kevin Gisette, who's no longer in the UFC. Easily submitted by Sam Patterson. Destroyed by Naraji. I know people are going to argue that, oh, Kiefer Crosby, he's a man. He didn't take the DQ win like he could have. He would have been cut from the UFC if he took the DQ win anyway. And regardless of the knee to the head that he got, he's shit. He isn't UFC worthy. Send him back to Misfits Boxing or wherever he came from before this, because he ain't UFC worthy. Kiefer Crosby, get him out the UFC. This is what I don't understand about the UFC. They cut good fighters and then they'll keep guys like Crosby in the UFC. Get him out. And then for Naraji, I'd probably do Naraji against somebody like Charles Radke next. I know we said he's going to move down to 155, so this might not make sense. But if he is going to stay at 170, which I think, you know, I don't mind him doing, I think a good fight that could make sense is somebody like Charles Radke. Like I said, Naraji, he's a very dangerous guy on the feet. I think like 8 of his wins or most of his wins are by KO. Hits very hard. Charles Radke is a very similar guy. Hits very hard on the doesn't necessarily hit very hard, but a fairly dangerous striker who's also quite vulnerable. So I think this is fair for Naraji if he's going to stay at 170. He's 2-0 in the UFC if you can't road to the UFC with both KO wins. Radke, he's 1-3 in his last 3. Got a good KO over Semmelsberger, just got knocked out by Mike Mallet. This is a perfect fight for Naraji. It's a step up in competition against somebody who's actually UFC worthy. I could see Radke winning this one. Radke is a pretty solid striker, to be fair. Like I said, he's vulnerable, but he's still a decent striker, so I could see Radke getting this one done. But if Naraji can go out there and knock out Radke, then I guess you've got a bit of a Chinese prospect in the UFC. So Naraji, Radke, I'd get that done. 2 dangerous strikers going at it. It should be a banger. Kevin Borjas loses to Sumadaji and looks like he didn't even want to be there, to be fair. Looked like he was just showing up for a paycheck. Again, I don't want to keep doing this to fighters that lose because I feel like I've been doing this a lot recently, but cut him from the UFC. At this point, the guy's 1-3 in the UFC. Had a really, really good performance against Ronaldo Rodriguez, but apart from that, what has he done? You know, we got finished by Alessandro Costa, lost to Joshua Van, fair enough, lost to Sumadaji. It just looks like he don't want to be there no more. He showed up against Sumadaji, barely threw anything, was kind of there to be a punching bag, and like I said, 1-3 in the UFC. Your only win ever being over Ronaldo Rodriguez, which I guess was a good win, but Ronaldo isn't anything special either. He's probably going to have to get cut from the UFC, especially with the amount of flyweight talent we've got in the UFC now, and we need to kind of make room. Kevin Borjas, if he's going to perform like that and he's not even winning anywhere, I say we just cut him from the UFC, in a bit Kevin Borjas. And then for Sumadaji, a bit of an OG for the flyweight division. I think he used to be in the top 15 as well. Isn't the most consistent guy. I'd give him another opportunity in the top 15. I'd do Sumadaji versus Bruno Silva next. Get him back in the top 15. Yeah, Sumadaji's on a 2-fight winning streak. Beat Mitch Raposo, beat Kevin Borjas. Bruno Silva's on a 2-fight losing streak. Knocked out by Manel Cap, knocked out by Joshua Van. Bruno Silva needs to fight outside the rankings, and I think we give Sumadaji an opportunity to fight in the top 15 again. Like I said, he's had some good wins on his name. Sumadaji went on a bit of a losing streak. He's now on a winning streak. He just beat Kevin Borjas. I think we give him someone in the top 15. I think he's like number 14 is Bruno Silva. And to be fair, I think it'll be a fun fight. Bruno Silva, yes, he's a bit chinny and he's a bit, you know, he kind of fades as the fight goes on, but he's still a very quick, and he's actually quite technical on the feet as well as Bruno Silva. He was on a winning streak as well previous to the fight with Manel Cap, and Sumadaji, dangerous guy, decent output. I think this would be quite a good fight in the flyweight division, so I do Sumadaji versus Bruno Silva, step down for Bruno Silva, step up for Sumadaji, get the fight done. And then for Waldo Cortez Acosta, loses to Sergey Pavlovich. Didn't really shock me, to be fair. I know I picked Pavlovich to win by TKO, but it went kind of how I expected. Competitive fight on the feet where Pavlovich wins. I think we'll do Waldo Cortez Acosta versus Rizvan Kuniev. I think this is probably the fight that makes more sense for Acosta next. Rizvan Kuniev lost to Curtis Blades in his UFC debut, which, by the way, he should have never got anywhere, but he lost to Curtis Blades. But to be fair to Rizvan Kuniev, he made it really competitive with Blades. And we're talking about number 4 ranked, whatever he is, Curtis Blades, in your debut. And I think a lot of people were impressed by that performance from Kuniev, so let's give him Waldo Cortez Acosta. Acosta's just lost to Sergey Pavlovich. He's, I think, number 6 or number 7 in the division. He's going to have to fight a bit of a step down in competition. And to give him Rizvan Kuniev, and I think this fight would be super intriguing because, again, I feel like we don't really know exactly how good Rizvan Kuniev is. I mean, the guy's had 1 fight in the UFC, and it was a very, very close loss to Curtis Blades. Acosta, we know he's top 10 worthy. Might not be top contender worthy, but he's still top 10 worthy. So let's give him Kuniev. I honestly don't know how this fight would go. I could see Cortez Acosta kind of sticking and moving and kind of picking him apart on the feet. I can see Kuniev having success too, because to be fair to Kuniev, he's actually quite an athletic, chubby guy for the heavyweight division. A lot of these fat heavyweights are ploddy, but Kuniev looks kind of impressive for it. So I think the perfect fight to kind of gauge how good Kuniev is. Give him Waldo Cortez Acosta. Perfect fight to make. Let it done later on this year. Maybe on like some sort of Abu Dhabi card. Acosta, Kuniev, get it done. Then for Sergey Pavlovich, I'd give him Cyril Gane. Yeah, I think this is a fight that's kind of been a fantasy fight in the heavyweight division for a long time, and I think now's the perfect time to make it after Cyril Gane loses to Tom Aspinall. Without a doubt, Gane's going to lose to Aspinall. There's no doubt in my mind that Cyril Gane is either going to get knocked out or submitted by Tom Aspinall. He's losing that fight. And when he needs a bit of a rebound matchup, let's give him Sergey Pavlovich. Pavlovich versus Gane. The fight that we've been... like I said, this has been like a fantasy fight all the way since like 2023. And I think now's the perfect time to make it. Pavlovich, obviously one of the most dangerous dudes in the heavyweight division. A bit more kind of confined complacent these days, but still one of the best strikers. Very snappy on the feet, great accuracy. In Ciryl Gane, I don't need to say Ciryl Gane is one of the best strikers in the heavyweight division right now. I think the only other guy who can really compare to him is Tom Aspinall himself. Gane, Pavlovich, two of some of the best strikers in the division, two of some of the just ultimate best in the division, guys that have been at the top for a long time and never fought, two guys that at the time of fighting will be Tom Aspinall victims. Pavlovich, Gane, get the fight done, because for Pavlovich, he's now on a 2-fight winning streak, doesn't really deserve a title fight because he's already been knocked out by Tom Aspinall and he lost to Volkov. Gane, if he loses to Tom Aspinall, don't just give him a can. I'm sick of this method with Ciryl Gane too, where he loses the belt or loses in a title fight, and then they will give him a can. He'll beat the can, and then he'll have like an immediate title fight after, or like a layup contender fight. Now let's chuck him in the deep end. You lose to Aspinall, you get Sergey Pavlovich. I honestly don't know who I'd pick to win this fight, because I feel like Pavlovich, despite not getting the finishes, you can tell that his striking ability has been improving in his recent fights, and Gane doesn't really improve, but he's, like I said, consistently been one of the best strikers. I'd probably pick Gane by decision, but Gane, Pavlovich, get it done after Gane loses to Tom Aspinall. And then for Brian Ortega, yeah, there's no way this guy's making 145 again. He's in a complete mess of a career. I'd probably do Brian Ortega versus Renato Moicano next. This is probably the fight I'd do next for Brian Ortega. Yeah, the guy ain't making 145. In his last couple of fights, he's barely been able to make 145. He has to be at 155 from now on. Even though before I said that probably wasn't the right move, he's obviously not clearly able to make that weight anymore. Let's move him up to 155. Now, to be fair, these guys have fought before, but it was way back in like 2017. Brian Ortega finished him, but that was in a different career spot. That was when Brian Ortega was in his prime and Moicano was on the come up. And I think it just makes sense. Both of these guys are in a bit of a rough career spot. Moicano's lost his last 2 fights. Ortega's lost 4 of his last 5 fights as well. So both of these guys need a bit of a rebound matchup. Brian Ortega moving up to 155. And again, it's kind of stylistically quite an intriguing matchup. Like I said, I know we've seen it before, but you've got a very heavy grappling guy with decent striking in Ortega. Again, similar to Moicano, heavy grappler with, I guess, okay striking in Moicano. So Moicano versus Ortega, I think it makes sense. 2 guys that need a win, 2 guys that have a very similar style. Ortega's debut at 155, and he's not getting like a top contender, he's getting someone who's barely top 15. Ortega, Moicano, get the fight done. And then for Aljamain Sterling, called for a title fight with Volkanovski, well, you're definitely not getting that, mate, especially with how stacked featherweight is right now. I think a fight that makes sense is Aljamain Sterling versus Arnold Allen for Arnold Allen's comeback fight. Yeah, Sterling beats Brian Ortega, back in the winning column, and to be fair, he is a bit of a top contender at 145 right now. You know, he's won 2 of his last 3 fights, lost to Evloev, but he beat Calvin Kattar and beat Brian Ortega. And Arnold Allen, he's coming off a good win over Giga Chikadze. He hasn't been since July of 2024, but he is coming off a good win, and he's won 1 of his last 3 fights as well. Lost to Evloev and Holloway, 2 guys that would beat Sterling anyway. Both of these guys are in the top of the featherweight division, and I think the winner of this fight could get a title eliminator. If Aljamain Sterling can beat Arnold Allen, he's won 3 of his last 4 fights. He's only lost being competitive to Evloev. I don't mind Sterling getting a title eliminator too. And for Arnold Allen, if he beats Sterling, you've beat Giga Chikadze, you've beat Sterling. The next step for Arnold Allen has to be another title eliminator. So Sterling, Arnold Allen, it's a step up for Aljamain Sterling, a guy that's actually got pretty decent takedown defense and solid striking in Arnold Allen. And for Arnold Allen, again, a step up. He's facing a former champion, one of the best grapplers in this division, after he's coming off a win over Giga Chikadze. So Sterling, Allen, get the fight done later on this year. I think it makes sense. And if you want to drag it out, I guess you can do it for the London card, which the UFC is probably going to do in early 2026. So get that fight done. And then for the main event, Mingyang Zhang gets finished by Johnny Walker as one of the biggest favourites on probably this year. You know, one of the biggest prospects and one of the biggest favourites to beat Johnny Walker. Gets finished. He's now ranked number 40 in the division. He's going to have to fight down, and I think there's no better guy to put him against than the guy right below him, Alonzo Menifield. I think this is a good rebound matchup for Mingyang Zhang. Mingyang Zhang versus Alonzo Menifield, kind of just to see how good Mingyang Zhang actually is, because Mingyang Zhang in his last 2 finished Anthony Smith, lost to Johnny Walker. I think it's safe to say Mingyang Zhang like borderline top 15, and for Alonzo Menifield, he's on a 2-fight winning streak now, but the 2 wins he's beat, 2 guys he's beaten are both cans, nowhere near on the same level as Mingyang Zhang. This fight kind of intrigues me, because as much as I want to say Mingyang Zhang goes out there and demolishes him, he looked shit in the fight with Johnny Walker. So even though he could definitely get the job done over Menifield being on the winning streak he is, he could get the job done. But I feel like Menifield's too chinny. He'd probably get TKO'd. It's the perfect fight to give. It's just the perfect rebound matchup for Mingyang Zhang to get another win against someone in the top 15, to be fair. I don't think there's anybody unranked right now at 205 who, you know, desperately needs somebody in the top 15 either. So Menifield, Mingyang Zhang, slight step up for Menifield, slight step down for Mingyang Zhang in the rankings. Put them against each other. I think that fight makes sense. And then for Johnny Walker. Let's answer his prayers. Let's do Johnny Walker versus Jan Blachowicz. I think this fight makes ultimate sense. I have nothing against this matchup. Johnny Walker called out Jan Blachowicz in the post-fight Octagon interview, and like I said, it makes sense. You know, Jan Blachowicz is number 5. He's going to have to fight down. Johnny Walker's number 13. I know it's a massive step up in competition, but when you take into account that Jan Blachowicz has lost the vast majority of his recent fights and he's on a 3-fight winning streak, he's going to have to fight down. Johnny Walker just got back in the winning column, and I think it'll be an interesting matchup because Jan Blachowicz, I mean, 2 years ago, Jan Blachowicz would have been a monumental favourite over Johnny Walker. You know, Polish power, one of the best strikers in the division. People would have picked him to knock out Johnny Walker, but you know, Johnny Walker coming off that good win over Zhang Mingyang, and Jan Blachowicz being in the form of his career that he's in right now, this might be a lot more competitive than people think, and I can see both of these guys winning. Like I said, Jan Blachowicz, he's on a losing streak, and he's up there in age. His performances, I know he made it close with Carlos Ulberg, are getting, you know, a lot more stale, so I could see Johnny Walker somehow breaking their top 5, but for Jan Blachowicz, I mean, like I said, it's a stylistically favourable matchup. Jan Blachowicz historically hits hard. He's still one of the best strikers at 205. Johnny Walker's chinny, and to be fair, people are going to argue that it was fluky, the win that he got over Zhang Mingyang. So Walker, I mean, it wasn't fluky at all, to be fair, but you know, it was lucky, let's put it that way. Walker, Jan Blachowicz, get the fight done, get Walker in the top 5, give Jan Blachowicz a step down in competition. I'd do this fight later on this year, but those are the fights I make after UFC Shanghai. Let me know if you agree or disagree with the fights that I've made, and if there's any other matchups that you do instead, and thank you for watching.